Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Jesse Cotton here, and we are home from YCS Indianapolis 2023. Yeah, the event really didn't go the way I wanted to. I obviously did not top. However, I did have an X2 record. Unfortunately, the tiebreakers weren't enough, and I got 35th. I'm very sad when that happens because it feels like you did pretty well, but still didn't go your way. And, you know, that kind of sucks. Anyways, wanted to share my deck with you guys still, and because it's not a topping record, I didn't put it on the luxury channel. And it was a relatively plain Unchained deck, but there was specifically one theory I wanted to go over with you guys. And more than just Unchained, it's applicable to many decks in the format, so I urge you guys to at least stick around. I want to talk about it first, that way people who aren't interested in the Unchained stuff can, you know, get their fill and leave. But I do think it is worth watching that first little portion because it's applicable for most decks right now, and it's just good theory in general. And yes, now, before we get into the video, I want to give a huge shout out to Team Sam. I use his sleeves every event, and they are fantastic. So go check out the site tsx1.com and get 10% off on all the sleeves and playmats there. I believe he has a lot of collections coming out now as the winter time is approaching, and we got all the sales. So yeah, make sure to go check it out. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so this is the deck list that I ended up playing. Now obviously you can see this is relatively similar to something I've been playing for a while. It's Unchained, it's Thrusts. Now, the biggest thing that's probably a surprise is the side deck of Shifter and Nekomon King, or nekomon King. I'm not sure how it's supposed to be said, but whatever. Now, if you're not familiar with nekomon King, because that's probably the most a different card in here. It's a level 1 Earth. If it sends your opponent's or sends your grave during your opponent's turn by their effect, it becomes the end phase of the turn. So yeah, the application for this should be pretty obvious, and it's versus tier elements. When they use an Yugioh or a Kelbeck in the top 5 cards of your deck to the grave, if they hit this, the turn ends. So hopefully depriving them of an ability to actually make a meaningful board, depriving them of Dweller, because if they had Dweller they would have stopped this, of Toad, of Baron, all those type of shenanigans. Now, the reason I did this is as I am approaching the format right now, and I was thinking about my deck, hand traps seem to be quite good. They're quite popular, largely because I feel like if you ever plan to beat tier elements going second, you need a combination of 2+ hand traps, and they trade decently into Rescue Ace and Pearly. Now, board breakers are good versus both those decks as well, but they're not good versus tier elements, and that's why we tending to see a lot of hand traps in players' decks, and myself was included in this. But I also noticed, or I also feel like if I'm just playing with the same hand traps as everyone else, then I'm at a straight up disadvantage. I mean, I'm not disadvantaged, but I have no competitive edge. And, because everyone else is probably going to know my deck when they play against me, it does put me, kind of behind. I want to have some sort of other edge, and typically you try to be ahead of the curve a bit. And if you're playing against other players who are doing well the YCS, you should assume that they are also playing against decks, a lot of hand traps, and succeeding. So you don't want to just do hand traps. I wanted to have some board breakers in there, good against those. And if people are doing well with lots of hand traps, I wanted to have cards that are good against that. So that's kind of what led me to wanting to play Talents and Thrust in my deck. But Unchained, while it can fit more non-engine to combat stuff like Dweller or the format than something like Tier can, it's not like it's, some Solomon Great deck. It doesn't have 20 flexible spots. It's still less. And you can see I went to about 13 spots here with 40 cards in my deck. It's about 30 engine that you can play in the deck, or that you should be playing, and I think that number is pretty good. And you can go above 40 a bit, but there's a limit. Like, you reach the cap. I think this is about where the absolute max I can be in terms of non-engine, and it's, you can't fit enough hand traps to draw 2+ consistently and also have these Talents and Thrusts in the deck. So I ended up doing some thinking, and I'm like, well, these hand traps aren't that great in a lot of matchups. So the main matchup I want them would be tier elements, and even then 2 hand traps doesn't always stop them because that deck is insane when it goes first. And same with the mirror match. Like, they're really good at playing through hand traps, so throwing hand traps into them, especially if it's terribly just one hand trap, feels bad, especially if it comes at the cost of other matchups. And the hand traps that I liked against Race was mostly stuff that stopped Dweller. Right? That was the reason that was the problem I had in that matchup was Dweller. I wanted to focus on stopping Dweller. So when I was looking under those guidelines, I'm realizing, well, if I can find a solution to deal with tier elements, then I don't need hand traps that don't stop Dweller, because that's the only thing I need it for, really. If I beat Dweller versus Rescue Ace, I'm feeling fine. I felt Purely wouldn't be that popular, and that it was a fine matchup anyways. And the board breakers was probably better against Purely regardless if I can fit those in. So I realized, okay, let's cut Ash, Droll, those type of cards. Now, if you can Veil or Imperm a Proxy Expedition, you deny them getting to Dweller, and that should be good enough to keep you, in a good spot versus those decks. And then Nibiru does a similar thing as well in that position. And then those are the hand traps I can play / main deck to deal with Dweller, aside into more if needed. And because I'm not overloading my deck with hand traps, now I'll have space for talents cards. Now that means I still need to find a solution for tier elements that felt, decent. I decided obviously going first, I'd be fine. Going second, I needed something, but I couldn't afford a main deck anything too wacky, so it'd try to be a lose game 1, win game 2, 3 type of thing, where I go first game 2, it'd be comfortable, and then game 3, I just have my side deck cards. And the first thing that came to mind is more obvious one is Shifter. So yeah, I know Shifter in this deck seems weird, but this deck has always been playable, partially because Shifter's not as insane against it. How do I Flu is so good with Shifter against this deck? Is your matchup dynamic changes drastically. You're playing a follow-up game versus them, not interrupt game, and Shifter turns off your follow-up, which is a big problem. You can still do things, though. It's not like you're playing tier. And this is especially nice because this deck has easy, simple OTK setups with Shifter. So say I'm playing versus the Chairman player, and they start playing, you Shifter them, they should end on pretty much nothing. And even if they can somehow get to Dweller, it doesn't do anything, because your card's getting banished. Which is really funny, because you can also draw Shifters to 6, and sometimes it helps, but regardless, you're able to Shifter them, and what do? So now, if you're able to get to a red guy and a pop, specifically a Ruha, which is a little more limiting, you special Rakea from the deck. At both attack directly is 3,000. In the battle phase, Rakea can pop a Ruha to summon Abominable Soul. Abominable Soul on summon, you discard the pop a card. Now you pop the Rakea, and you summon Shavara for the deck. That is 3k plus 2k, 3k plus 3k plus 2k, 8,000. Super simple lethal. Now, obviously, this is exactly 8,000, so if they have a little more life points, like Advent, which is annoying, doesn't work, which is why this is not a great strategy versus Flu. And bodies can be a problem. That's not to say you can't deal with this stuff. You have Change of Hearts. You'll have extra pushes with Contract. Tour Guide helps as well, because it gets, if you open up Tour Guide plus like Spell, that's one extra body, because there's Ruha, and then you have this, plus the 2 combo. That's the general thing you go for. And either way, at the very least, you should be able to put up some interruption to make this not as bad. If you can't kill him, you can see in my feature match, my hand wasn't great. I was still able to at least put up the Caesar, the 4k damage up, and it put us into a grind, which is way more favorable than a normal Chillman game when they go first. Unfortunately, my dead draws prevented me from winning that match. But yeah, that was the strategy there, and I felt like it was fine. Obviously, this isn't some fairy tale card that solves all of my problems, but it is still good. Now, Nekomon King was the next card that was very much a high roll type of gamble. You need this card in your deck. You don't want to draw it. You can use it really if you draw it, except by discarding it for Abominable Soul. And you want to just mill it off of Yugioh and Kelbeck and end the turn. So I figured I'd have 2 ways to kind of deal with them, or maybe a high roll, this stopping their turn, which is unlikely, but it can. And that would be my main strategy for Tier Elements. And if this works, it ends their turn, then I feel comfortable. Again, I can kill them. This deck is very strong and very good at putting up damage really fast. What matters a little bit as well with this is with Typhon existence, being a normal summon that you can make Typhon over is actually something that's not terrible. Obviously, it's not fantastic, but when you get into grind games, it can come up, especially if you're dead drawing this later in the game. So yeah, it was worth mentioning. But yeah, so I think that's a general approach that decks can start taking now, is this kind of Nekomon King shifter thing, where if they're not super reliant on the grave, they can shift over these side deck spots instead and not have to play a million hand traps. Instead, focusing on what actually matters, like the ones that are specifically really good at covering their bases, so in this case, the Nib, Veiler, Imperm, and then playing board breakers that are more impactful instead. You can play Talents, Thrusts, or Dusters, even leaves if you need to. Droplets, not even bad either. Say, if I was playing Triff, I'm not sure how good Shifter's in the deck, but I imagine you can play it, because I've heard people say they can play through it. Maybe, like, if you're playing versus tier as that deck, you should try, like, Nekomon King and Shifter. Granted, that deck doesn't lose the Dweller, so you don't have to just prevent the Dweller to the same degree. I think the sideboard approach can definitely work for other decks. I know Pack played it in his Pearly deck for similar reasoning. He wanted to fit board breakers in without, destroying his matchup his tier. And I think Rescue Ace is probably similar as well. It can really fit this type of game plan in. So yeah, it's a million ones to go over, and that's the biggest thing about this deck that is different. Nekomon King Shifter type of theory and approach to the format. So I wonder if more people start playing stuff like that. I think it was pretty good for me, and we'll see what happens for Richmond. But as for the rest of the deck, I'll quickly go over it. The non-engine I played, should be pretty self-explanatory for my last spiel, and that is the Nibiru Talents Thrust Change a Heart Imperm. Again, you play one extra Thrust spell if you play 3 Talents, just because if you see the one, you want to see one of the card help break the field afterwards. And Change a Heart is still flexible, especially in grind games. I like this as well. If they Dwellered me, you can steal the Dweller and make Typhon or Zeus. Just clearing it that way, if you can at least stabilize for the turn, you can try get into a grind game and you're fine. And it would have happened once it could have happened a couple times, but I ended up always panning out a little differently. And yeah, I think I used Change of Heart a little bit, but it was okay. And then I put in Imperm and Nib as cards that beat Dweller, but also were probably decent on their own. Veiler's a good alternative as well to either put in for something else as well. Although you could lean further into the board break strategy as well. I decided the Nib and Imperm probably better than Veiler, so I had main deck the two inside the other as far as my anti-Dweller cards. And the rest of the deck is just engine. It all stays the same. I don't think anything would have changed with this. But no regrets. Still don't like Disaster. Even less so than now because you play less mirrors. But yeah. Side we talked about a bit. So you got the Nekomon and the Shifter, obviously. And Veiler is still good. Stop Dweller. Now also stopping Dweller's Encore. And the Encore still has the dual purpose as well as dealing with the Pearly matchup. So happy with that. The rest of Thrust spells. Versus when you get Dwellered, sometimes you have board breakers. It's still fine. You can Duster them, and then you can search board breakers and Zeus them back, which is okay. LD Bus just purely should be pretty self-explanatory. And then Barrier for when you go first versus any deck that's really not Race or Mirror. If they hand trap you, which I expected there to be a ton of to set this. Versus Race in the Mirror, I felt I could play through hand traps good enough. It didn't actually matter to have anything to set off this. Of course, these still kind of help. Like there's still disruptions, but like this card does nothing. And that's good enough. Extra deck is a bit of a shakeup. Obviously, 2 new cards came out. We had Typhon and Little Knight. The card that I also was wanting to include was the Dark Charmer. Dark Charmer is pretty good with Tour Guide. It's nice with Nibiru especially, or if you play Fenris, because it lets you make SP easier, and then also can crash to search a Tour Guide or an Abominable Soul, and steal their monsters, kind of just get into plays. However, I ended up, or at Trauma, sorry. But I ended up not going with it because I just didn't think it would come up enough. Fortunately, if I did play it in my round 6 feature match or round 5, whichever one it was, I may have been able to win that game. Would have been better situation than I was in, but it's okay. I've seen some people play multiple Little Knights. I don't think it's necessary. This card did not even come up every game, and mostly summoning it off Rage. And when that happens, you just don't need a second one. I don't know why you would. The game should be over when you're getting that far. I've also seen people cut Unicorn. This one's weird to me because these cards are not synonymous. They're not like some, like substitutable good for each other. SP is definitely a stronger card with Rage, but there are some limitations to Little Knight. For one, it's not a Fiend. So if you've used Rikea in the turn, cannot summon it. If you have Shavara on the field, summon from the hand, which can happen depending on how you lay your interruptions, cannot summon it. And both those things are, somewhat avoidable, but still, we're like limiting your flexibility is not something I would want to do. The other reason as well is that when you are playing on your turn, Little Knight says you can't attack directly when you use the banish effect. And if you're looking for that monster removal, Unicorn ends up being better because you aren't limited by that attack directly. You want to kill them that turn, especially if they're playing for follow-up. So you need that for that reason as well. So there are some Fiend restrictions which, aren't overwhelming in this deck, but do exist, and also the ability to attack still. Now, Little Knight was, of course, fantastic, and I summoned it plenty, but I still summoned Unicorn, and I would not remove it from my deck. Cards that were worse is Griffin, which I've still summoned 0 times, and I keep getting persuaded to play every event, and that card sucks. Muckracker comes up not much either, but still more than this bullshit. Probably shouldn't have sweared, but whatever. And then Typhon was great. You know, this card beats Vanadium a lot of the time because it deals with Baron, but Turbulence as well. And when you get Dweller, this can help kind of clean up the field a bit and stabilize, especially when your hand has multiple of the traps, you know, because you couldn't really do much meaningful stuff. And then you have some like board breakers. You just attack a bit. You like normal summon one of these guys are nonsense. You make Typhon attack, bounce. They have no monsters left. Set one of these and try to get into a grind game. That doesn't always work, but this will win you a couple more games than you probably should have. So it is worth the spot in that regard for sure. And then it's a Fiend, so you're not going to be stuck with the locked issues there. And yeah, and if you revive it off Yama, it won't have its effect to lock 3k monsters. Don't get too antsy with that type of synergy because it doesn't exist. However, you can revive it for whatever reason if you want. I just have a 29 body, which isn't tiny, I guess. But yeah. That is the deck. I was pretty happy with it. No idea what I'm playing for Richmond yet. I'm posting the Duels Cup first. Make sure you check that out. It's starting Friday, like bright and early in the morning. We'll be streaming the Duels Cup grinding, try and get to Worlds. And then after that, we'll probably do some more TCG streams, try to figure out what the deck is for Richmond. Very well could be this. I enjoyed this. I thought it was good. It's fun. And I felt very control in most of my games. I feel like I had 2 unfortunate losses, and I was X2. Wasn't a bad record at all. So, yeah, I urge you guys to try a deck like this out, or just test out that type of theory where you're able to switch up your deck a bit. Because I really liked it for myself. And anyways, that is all for now, guys. And I'll see you all next time. Peace.